Now let's talk about shading and how to render everything out. Towards the beginning of this course, when you saw the teaser video, I actually rendered that out in Redshift just because that's going to go a lot faster. However, I'll show you how to do this in Mantra. It's a very straightforward process. And if you decide to use a different render engine, it's most likely a very similar thing. So our Pyro import is right here. If I middle mouse, we have all these fields, and we're basically going to use density to get what we need. As a matter of fact, if you know that you only need density, in the future, it's a good idea to remove any fields you don't need. So just keep that in mind as well. But anyway, we have all this stuff. Let's go ahead and use that. On this Pyro import, I'm going to go to the Render tab. Under Material, let's create a Pyro shader. Drag that in. And now, if I go to the render view, that's an old render. That's kind of where we're going right there. We can press this right here and Mantra will eventually start up. Okay, and at first we have something like this. So it's not quite looking, well, it does look kind of like Steam, but it's way too much. So let's go ahead and start dialing in some of these settings. For the density scale, let's set that to about 0.5 for right now. And also, before we get too far in these settings, I like going to the smoke field tab right here, and you could say fit to range. What that will do is it will allow you to specify your source range, which is right now from about 0 to, well, 10 or so. 10 is about the highest density value we have, and now I'm going to fit that from 0 to 1. So that makes a pretty big difference right away from how much intense steam we get out of this. And so, as you can see already, this is pretty dang close to what we would want. There's a few more settings to adjust here though. For the smoke color, I like going for this crazy teal and then bringing the saturation way down so there's just a tad bit of blue that's being scattered along. Well, not really scattered, but there's a slight blue tint to the actual steam. Kind of like what water would do if you were to look at it, you know, through the air. So we have a little bit of blue right there. The scattering phase represents how light will reflect off of the small little water particles. If we go in the negative direction, you'll notice that we're going to see a lot more of this light show up, especially up here. And so basically when you go negative, that's telling these particles to reflect light back to where it's coming from. And that's typically useful for things that are more sooty or have more diffuse particle elements in them. For water though, it's a very refractive sort of material, so light typically goes through it more than it bounces back. And I'm going to set this to the opposite direction at about 0.5. That basically is saying the light's going to go through this and not really bounce back so much. We don't have fire in this, so let's just go ahead and turn that to 0. And for the shadow density, we probably want to turn this down a little bit because this represents how much the smoke casts shadows on itself. So let's try a low value, maybe 0.5 on that. And this should be a little bit more similar to what Steam would do. Steam wouldn't really cast a whole lot of shadows because light's going straight through it. Okay, so we have that. I think that's probably the majority of what we need right there. At this point, it's a matter of you can tweak any setting you'd like. This looks like Steam to me, and like I said, at this point, if you want to exaggerate things or make it stylized or however you'd like to make it, now you're in a really good position to change any setting that you'd like. Now, as for the lighting, I have basically just this one light right here shining down on it. However, you can also create your own light that's responsible only for affecting the smoke. So maybe a cool way of doing this is you would create a light And let's create a sun, which is like a distant light. Maybe let's go down like this. And then under the contributions, we can basically say everything except for the volume needs to be unchecked. So we'll go ahead and add all of this stuff except for the volume and uncheck it. So we'll go like this, and now I believe this sun should only affect our smoke. Let's see if that's true. And now, as you can see, if I turn the exposure way up, the sun is in fact hitting this steam. It's just really intense. So let's maybe try 2, see what that does. It adds just a little bit of extra illumination to this whole thing. I don't know if it's going to make a huge difference. You might be better off actually just taking an area light and just illuminating only one section of this. That might be something I end up doing in the redshift render. It's just kind of going diagonal with a light. But really just kind of play around with these lights. You can get them to only affect the smoke by doing what I just did right there. And that's the majority of lighting and rendering. Now, before I go, there's one more really important thing that we ought to do. And that is speed up the rate at which the frames are playing. Because if we go to our reference, you'll notice that the steam is moving really quickly, and the steam we have right here is moving a lot more slowly. So what I like to do, I guess one way to do this, is you cache everything out, and you cache more frames than what you need, or more than what you think you need, and you use this time warp node. If you use this, and then you go up here and you say by speed, turn that speed to 2, and then adjust this output input frame range. So the input frame would be, let's say, 240, and the output would be half of that because we're going twice as fast, so 120. Now, if I do a playback, look at how much more convincing this is. Anytime you have smoke at a very small scale like this, you want to make it look like it's going really fast. And that'll make the smoke or the steam or whatever feel like it's a small object or at a small scale. If you had, let's say, a volcano or some huge mega explosion happening, you would want to do the opposite. You would want to actually make it feel slower than it might actually be. And that really will help sell this effect a lot more. One more thing to mention is that in this render, you'll notice that I have these cool light streaks going diagonally. I ended up going with that whole diagonal idea, and I used a gobo on my key light with some volumetric scattering in Redshift to get those cool light streaks. Now, if you don't know what a gobo is or how to use that with a light, then check out Houdini for the new artist too, because again, that's where I talk about some of those basics. And that wraps up this course. I want to thank you for watching, and what's coming up is pretty great, because now that you have this steam exercise all figured out, you know the basics, and you have all kinds of great options available to you when it comes to any pyro effect. So the next thing we'll take a look at is how the combustion model works. We'll take a look at divergence, fuel, how that relates to temperature, how to source all that stuff in different ways. It's going to be a really awesome course that I'm making right now, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you all very soon. Until then, I hope you have a great day.